Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Christ and Coffee podcast, bringing the church together one coffee hour conversation at a time. Today, we have my boss, lead pastor of Church for the Nations in Burbank, Pastor Jim Kermath, joining the program, talking today about finding our strengths and how to focus on what we're good at. In addition to being a lead pastor, Pastor Jim is also a life and career coach and is a certified Gallup Strength Finders coach as well. Pastor Jim, good to have you on the program.
Thanks, Hi. Glad to be here.
It's been fun getting to know each other, working together.
Yeah.
In this new position I have, moving out west. Thank you so much for welcoming me and my family, and doing ministry together has been a lot of fun. And it's also been fun to know that there's another aspect to your work, and that's coaching people and helping them find purpose and direction, which is much needed. Half the time is like that's half the battle is if you're able to pinpoint where you're passionate about, what you're good at.
Yeah,
it really allows people to just thrive and excel.
Yeah, I was just sharing with Haig before we started that I have this extended quote from Peter Drucker, who's the great management guru, but he talks about all his years in teaching and how he encountered almost nobody who had any sense of what their true talents were, their strengths, for all the education they had and all their intentions for their life. They simply didn't know what they were running off of in terms of strength. So, and I've found that to be true in the church as a pastor. A number of people that I've counseled pastorally, but also ended up coaching, they just had no sense of how of what actually their talents, unique talents, were, and how those would factor in either to their career and work or ministry or both. So, so we need to help people figure this out.
Yeah, it's fascinating how like school your whole life, you pretty much have to regurgitate what's being said versus like people scouting your talent and being like, you're really good at this.
Yeah.
And sadly, like you just said, like it's in the church as well, where instead of focusing on people's strengths or finding it, we kind of tend to just be like, all right, let's all try to be the same type of person.
Yeah.
Or I've seen this many times as in the pastoral leadership role, you have one pastor trying to be a mold of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's always toxic because no one pastor is the same.
Yeah. Yeah. I had an experience when I was younger and doing some career reevaluation where I took a test called the 16PF, 16 personality factors, which by that time was 20 some odd factors, but it rates you along a series of scales like introversion, extroversion, whether you're adventurous or cautious, et cetera, et cetera.
Is it like a more elaborate Myers-Briggs or similar?
Probably a simplified Myers-Briggs.
Okay.
And so the whole idea behind that is you want to score in the 1s, 2s, and 3s or the 8, 9s, and 10s.
Yeah.
Because those define, that shows that in that scale, your personality is defined. But I didn't know that, and you mentioned the pastor who wants to be all things to all people. I idolized the Renaissance man.
Right. Everyone does in many ways, yeah. But
I wanted to be, embody all these different traits and have these kind of balance. So when I took the test, the therapist noticed that I was upset. I wasn't angry, but I just was not happy with the results. And he said, "What's going on? Why you don't seem like you're appreciating the results here?" Because I had scored 1, 2s, and 3s, 8, 9s, and 10s, and I said I wanted to score right down the middle and be balanced along all this stuff. He said, "Jim, that's where adolescents score."
Yeah.
He just burst out laughing. He said, "That's what adolescents score because their personalities aren't formed yet." So this is evidence that you are a unique person, that you score in these high levels. So forget the Renaissance man. We want to be, in fact, Gallup talks about what they call stars. They say in our society, when someone excels at something, athletically, in the entertainment industry, we call them a star. And there's stars in the corporate world as well. And he said, you'll notice that stars have sharp points. And Gallup says that's because they're not well-rounded. They have discovered their potential, their power, their talent in a particular area and developed it and done really well with it. So they're stars,
Not circles.
not circles.
Stars. I really like that imagery because I think that captures what this is all about.
Yeah.
Because I remember when I was getting mentored by someone, the one advice that he told me that stuck was focus on your strengths.
Yes.
And that kind of freed me from the burden of trying to be that Renaissance man or just try to compensate for weaknesses. So
Right.
can you elaborate more about that? Because I feel like that's often talked about. So instead of focusing on strengths, Pete, the advice is like, all right, you're not good at biochemistry for your report card, but you need to focus on your biochemistry to be
Right.
a successful person.
Right.
It's kind of the messaging you have indirectly
Yeah.
taught growing up. So.
Yeah, and I had a very traumatic experience in the ninth grade with a math professor who just rode me like crazy because he felt like I was a bright kid and I should be scoring higher in mathematics. And I was not attracted to math. I didn't enjoy doing it. And I just wanted to skate by. I didn't want to focus on that. And he actually at one point mocked me for the fact that I was in the drama club, in the class, in productions at the school. This is in junior high. And said, how in the world is this ever going to do you any good in the future? Well, it turns out I go into the pastorate where the drama was tremendously helpful. And the math, I've never used math or rarely, maybe to pull up a few statistics for a sermon. So Gallup says, in fact, Gallup's mission in the business world, and this is one of the reasons I'm attracted to them as an organization, is they want to change American management because American management focuses on weakness and tries to fix it. So maybe you've been in a corporate setting, in a job somewhere where they've determined you're not particularly good at something, and so they create an improvement plan for you. And you're going to take classes, or you're going to be assigned a mentor in the corporation, or you're going to go see a coach or something like that to try and fix your weakness.
Right.
Gallup says that's a complete waste of time.
Right.
And that's their philosophy, is we need to focus on people's strengths and manage around weakness. So if you're weak in a particular area, bring in someone else to augment you who's strong there. Don't try and change the personality of the person who's, so-called weak in a particular area, because it's not recognizing the fact that we're talented in some areas and not in others.
So can you just explain what is the Strength Finder's assessment test?
Sure.
How did it form? What are the strengths? We're not talking about physical strength here. We're talking about a whole spectrum of stuff.
Well, so let's see, where's a good starting point? Gallup will tell you that there are a zillion, as they've done their research, there's a zillion talents out there in the human race. Don Clifton and Chip Anderson, two psychologists, are the ones who put the assessment together. And what they found is that there's way too many talents in the human race to try and catalog them all. What they found as they began to figure out ways to test for this is that they fall into 34 bundles or buckets or themes of talent. So when they talk about the Strengths Finder, they're talking about identifying your themes, your top themes of talent versus all the other 34 talents that they have identified, themes of talent. So we're talking about a theme, and the idea of strength is that you have talents built in. And if you will work on those talents in the sense of gain knowledge, practice them, look for modeling that helps you to get better at it, et cetera, if you'll develop the talent, it can become a strength. And then Gallup says you do things with excellence and ease and enjoyment. It just naturally flows out of you.
So just to understand, there's these 34 categories, and they're thematic, and then they kind of find the thread of your narrative or your life strengths that kind of align with one of these 34.
Well, if you take the Strengths Finder, as our staff has recently done,
which has led to this conversation. It's super helpful. That's why I hope to help others. Yeah.
The first thing they'll give you is your 5 top talents, and They believe that out of those top five, 95% of your life is conducted by you calling on and using those particular talents.
Can you give some examples of what do some of these talents look like? Because it's not like
Yeah.
you're good at math. It's not. They're not. Yeah. Just explain what they are, because I
Right,
think they're.
right.
I think understanding what the definitions are is the hard part of unlocking the strength of the strength
So,
finders.
Haig and I and our staff are in the midst of a process of reassessing. We're pretty much a new staff. There's just a couple of us
Yeah.
who are left over from previous to COVID, actually. And so we're doing, I hope we'll end up with 3 different assessments. The first one was the Myers-Briggs, which talks about personality traits.
Yeah.
Traits are preferences. So I love cherry tomatoes. My wife hates them because they pop in her mouth. She likes to read murder mysteries. I like to read sci-fi fantasy. She goes to bed. She's asleep by 10:30. I'm up till midnight. So we have all these differences. Now, is Renee wrong for being different from me? Yes, she is. And so then I direct her to the prayer team to say, honey, you need to get this help. No, it's just a matter of our traits, our preferences.
Preferences. Okay.
All right. So that's the personality traits. Then there is this idea of talent. And Gallup will tell you you're built in. Biblically, as a pastor, I believe God, well, we know this scientifically, that we each have an utterly unique DNA.
Right.
And so he has constructed us each uniquely, and talent is part of that. And so that's the second phase of assessment that we want to do. We want to get at not just people's traits, but their particular strengths or the potential for strength.
Uh-huh.
And then the third one would be, in the church context, would be spiritual gifts,
Right.
which come after we receive Christ and become his followers. And God equips us with the Holy Spirit, who gifts us uniquely. And frankly, that's another reason I like Gallup, is because their model is similar to the biblical model.
Right. And coming from that Corinthians passage too, where it talks about spiritual gifts, right?
Right.
Like not everyone's supposed to be the hand or the feet. We're part of one body, but
Right.
we're not the same body part.
Exactly. And we're not interchangeable.
Right.
And so we have unique contributions to make to the body of Christ because of our unique mix of gifts. So those come later, but the talents are built in, and those are unique and different. But the whole idea in America that we've heard since we were little kids, that you can be anything you want to be,
Right.
if you just work hard enough. It's utter fiction. You can only be what has been built into you, talent-wise, to enable you to be.
Yeah. I remember going to this, like, it was kind of like doing a favor for someone, but there was it's like a self-help conference.
Yeah.
It felt like a really bad church retreat. But the whole premise, I think it was connected to like the book The Secret, something along those lines, where it's like this philosophy, your mind over matter, to this crazy extreme,
Right.
where you could just follow any dream as long as you envision it and want it.
Right.
So I was kind of trolling. I was just making fun of this whole concept, even though I believe in like the supernatural. I believe in a lot of the power of faith and stuff.
Yeah.
But each person in this conference was given a dream to live out. So I put NBA basketball player. I'm on the shorter side. I'm already past my prime. There's no way I'm gonna make it into the NBA.
Right.
And the whole time, like the person was like, "You're just limiting thoughts. There's this inability for you to not make it into the NBA." And I'm just like,
Yeah. And this is the fallacy. Well, that's probably a kind of a new agey form of it. Right?
yes,
This is the fallacy we live under in this country. And this is why so much of management tries to fix weakness, is if we could all be fixed to become this kind of general competent human being that everyone should be. And it's just ridiculous. It doesn't line up with how we are constructed, in my book. So
yeah, and it's because it's a beautiful way to view life, because it's not like everyone is unique, but everyone's limited too.
yes,
And that's why we need each other.
exactly.
And that's the beautiful thing about community. And it's getting scarier the more individualistic everyone is.
Yeah.
We are more reliant on trying to be this Renaissance man or woman
Right.
But the fact is, you can't be. You need everyone's giftings to work together, and that's where
Yes.
beautiful change happens in the church and society across the board. And the Strength Finders tool has been super helpful for me personally, because I did take it like 6 years ago, but I didn't have a proper coach to explain it.
Right.
So now having an explanation from you on my strengths has really been increasing the self-awareness needed to actually put into practice, or just to be free to be myself in many ways,
Yes.
or spiritual ways to allow me to be who God made me to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And that language right there, free to be myself, the person that God created me to be. It takes the pressure off
Right.
of this thing, of the whole Renaissance man thing. So, so ultimately, people will resist it initially because, what, you're telling me I can't be anything I want to be?
Right.
Um, and that sounds confining or restricting, but it's actually quite freeing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So what are some of the strengths as examples? Because I think there's what, like 4 categories from the 34 strength finders.
Well, so let me go back and say Don Clifton,
Okay.
who got the ball rolling on this, and really, he and Chip Anderson,
And what's their backgrounds? They're just
they're
psychologists.
psychologists,
Okay.
and he was at the University of Nebraska, and he was experimenting, playing with the idea, what would it be like, rather than fixating on what's wrong with people, with their their pathologies, their dysfunctions. As a psychologist, what if I was to focus on what's right with them? What if we had psychology was devoted to developing people, not just helping them heal from past wounds? So he was one of the early fathers of the positive psychology movement, and uh, the thing that really cemented his line of thinking as he was originally starting to play with these ideas was the university came to him and said, look, hey, we would like you to be in charge of implementing this reading intervention program. We have a bunch of slow readers that come into the school, and we'd like to help them improve in the 3 years that they're here. So would you take over that for us? Here's the interventions we want you to give them. Would you do this over 3 years, and let's see what the results are? And so because he was thinking about developing strengths, he said, okay, I'll be willing to do that only if you allow me to give the same interventions to the fast readers who come into the school. So they agreed to do that. And so he worked with both groups. At the end of 3 years, the upshot was that the slow readers at 90 words a minute who came in were up to 150. So, almost double. That's pretty good. The fast readers who came in at 350 words a minute were now reading at 2,800 words a minute.
Wow.
So to work on so here's the basic idea. He's trying to improve the weakness of the slow reader, and he gets less than, one time. It's not double reading speed, it's almost double. But when he starts with people already who have talent to read quickly, he gets 8 times the result. So that's what really cemented it for him. That's what was kind of the birth of the idea of the Strengths Finder, and let's go after discovering people's talent. And he did that with a guy at UCLA named Chip Anderson. So he is in Nebraska. Anderson was out here, and yeah. And then eventually Don Clifton bought the Gallup Corporation.
Okay.
And that's how the Strengths Finder came in to be. Gallup up to that point was a polling organization.
Yeah, because that's what I'm thinking whenever I hear that word.
Yeah. And they still do that. They're still studying American society. But now they do it from the standpoint of, we would like to help this society change to a strengths-based society rather than fixing weakness.
Great. And then, so there's these 34 themes or categories.
They came up with 34 themes of talent. And for instance, my number one is what they call maximizer.
Okay.
Now, I didn't understand until I took the Gallup test assessment why I was always intrigued by people's careers, why they like their jobs. I mean, there's just a whole range of different jobs. Why does somebody love to drive a truck versus be a nurse versus be a college professor? What makes people tick in that. So I've always been interested in that. Well, I discover Gallup would prefer you only take the assessment one time, but I didn't know that until I was certified, and I had taken it 3 times.
Yeah.
And every time I come out, maximizer
As your number
is
one
my
strength.
number one strength. And maximizers, it turns out, are the good to great people. They want to discover strengths, talents in a person and take them from just being good to greatness. So they want to see them excel. Excellence is the
So being
idea.
a pastor and a life coach is a good fit for this strength because it allows you to be in positions to coach people to maximize their strengths.
Yes.
And
exactly. Yeah. So you begin, part of when you take the test, you begin to understand your own behavior, what you're attracted to, why you've made the choices you have. But also then you begin to think about, well, how do I build on this? How do I develop this? How can I be more impactful in people's lives by, working on my strengths?
So when you focus on like maximizing people's potentials, but not only are you good at it, but it gives you a crazy sense of joy, fulfillment, or like unlike other jobs. Like
ease, excellence, and enjoyment. That's
the 3 E's.
That's the motto that Gallup came up with to explain when you are working in your strength zone. It just naturally comes out of you. They see talents as your natural built-in abilities. So when you function in them, you enjoy it, and it comes easily to you. And as you start to think in these terms, you see when someone is in their zone because they're bubbling over with energy, they're having fun, they're making really relevant contributions, they're impactful, and they do it effortlessly because it's built in.
It's built in, and the key is creating a job where income could happen that way, and also finding it. Yeah. So what would you say for people who are kind of like struggling to find their strengths or a career choice? Like, what are some of the tools you use to coach people to life and career? And
well, StrengthsFinder is certainly one of them.
Yeah.
And like we're doing with our staff, I would use the Myers-Briggs to try and surface their unique personality traits, and then StrengthsFinder to talk about their unique talents. And then if they happen to identify as Christians, and I would go with talk about spiritual gifts. Now that's a bit trickier because it's not something you can determine with an assessment. It's more about how the community has interacted with you. They're the best ones at telling you how you bless them in their lives. And when you see that happening consistently in a particular area, that's most likely the evidence of a gift. So that's a very rudimentary thing. And then there's other things, preferences you can look at, like do you want to work in an organization? What type of one?
Yep.
Where do you want to live? There's a whole bunch of factors. I come at the human personality when I'm coaching from about 7 or 8 different directions.
Got it.
Using different inventories. And it's all about self-discovery and then starting to make choices out of what you've learned
about yourself and your passions.
Yeah.
Where do you think calling fits into all this?
Well, good question. I think calling, well, really, to me, it depends on whether you're talking about biblical calling, about God calling you, or the societal notion, more secular notion of you have a calling, which just means you're good at something and you choose that as your profession. But I personally believe that God calls people, and he's certainly not going to call you to do something that doesn't match the way he's built you in the first place.
Yeah.
So certainly people are called to do things at time where they don't like their circumstances. There may be a lot of difficulty involved, but my conviction is that calling, it's got somehow to be related to those things, or it makes no sense.
Right.
He's built you in this unique way. So somehow the call is going to acknowledge that and have you move into that area where you can really be most impactful in people's lives.
It was interesting. my mother-in-law was in a Bible study last night, and one of the questions asked in the group was, why did God call Moses? So I was asked that question, and like, yeah, he might not have the talent to be a speaker,
Right.
but he had his brother Aaron to speak on his behalf.
Yes.
But he had the cultural makeup to be the leader, like growing up in Pharaoh's home and all that stuff. So like he had the blueprint to be the leader, but he needed help to have like the spokesperson.
Right.
And then I was thinking about the same kind of concept with the Apostle Paul.
Mm-hmm.
He had the calling, but he also had the knowledge, the circumstances to be who he was.
Mm-hmm.
Like God still utilized his makeup pre-calling.
Yes.
And I think there's something about that I think is connected. Like God will call people to do things, okay, maybe outside of their power. Of course, we can't live without God's help, but
Right.
but I think it does align with our natural DNA makeup too. Like,
Yes.
why wouldn't it? If
Yeah.
if they
Yeah.
didn't foresee this or something. So yeah, I think that's a really cool way to look at it. But yeah, focusing on your strengths, personalities, spiritual giftings. But you were hinting at that the spiritual giftings are something you don't take a test for, but the body of Christ has to confirm it.
Yes. Yeah. That's to me. That's the
And
best.
same thing with callings too, I think, because I think
Yes.
when
Yeah.
I was called, I had this personal conversion and this experience, but it really was the body of Christ confirming, keep teaching, keep preaching.
Yeah.
That's kept me preaching and teaching, because ultimately the calling is meant to serve others,
Yes.
not to serve myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say maybe this, if I could add this addendum about calling, because you mentioned something about the supernatural. So I believe I've been called to pastor, which includes preaching every week.
Yeah.
And I think God made that clear to me way back many years ago, and He has validated that with the results from people letting me know. But I also know that one of my top talents is intellection, which you happen to have. We're people who love to think.
Yeah.
We are constantly thinking. We have a hum going on. I realized today that I drove for an hour and a half from home to the office, and I didn't. I made one phone call, and the rest of the time I was either just praying or thinking.
Yeah.
And I didn't listen to the radio; it just flew by.
Right.
Because I love to think. Learner is one of my top talents. Learners are perpetual students. They're always reading. They're always investigating. They're always using a variety of ways to acquire knowledge, and we love the process of learning. So for me, being called to be a pastor where I have to preach, this love of learning and the maximizer thing I mentioned earlier, and the intellection, those are talents that were already there. Now, having said that, I enjoy what I'm doing. I enjoy researching sermons, etc. I don't believe I could have a spiritual effect on people. I think I could have a human effect, like a lecture, a good college lecture or something, because I've learned to communicate. And I've learned
or use these schools to work for some corrupt company or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in terms of a spiritual effect, I think that has to be augmented by the Holy Spirit. The Spirit of God has to show up and impact people. And I'm utterly aware and completely aware of that every week. I pray diligently for impact, influence in people's lives via the Spirit, that they wouldn't be inspired in a spiritual way, not simply be entertained or engaged intellectually, but literally shown something fresh about God, because God is taking my human effort and amplifying it out as only He can do spiritually. That makes sense? So that the two are wedded. So that would be another way I would talk about calling, is those two things coming together. My human abilities, but they're not near enough.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially if it's related to building God's kingdom and connecting people to Him and working with God to execute that. But it's there's this both, and there's this natural, but then the spiritual component is really where the fulfillment of all of it comes to have eternal significance in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's good stuff, Pastor Jim. thank you for joining us. We'll love to have you back on. And
My pleasure.
tend to have weekly conversations. So this is one of many that we've had, but this is the first time it's been recorded. So thank you so much for joining the podcast. Thank you for all who are listening. Tune in next week, and remember to stay caffeinated, my friends. God bless you all.
Crazy.